to Taxation is Theft Fest 2020. I'm your host, Dre, from Drunk and Disorderly Media. Our next guest is Joe McHugh. Joe's an independent candidate for president of the United States. He's a Marine veteran, entrepreneur, and author of the book Hijacking America. In his book, he describes 7 years of government entrapment in which he dodged FISA and Patriot Act-enabled lures for money laundering, tax evasion, statutory rape, child pornography, illegal Bitcoin sales, email and telephone interference, denial of employment, and more. Based on the government's belief he stole classified information related to 9/11 being an inside job. Let's welcome Joe.
Hey, Dre, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me. I think I'm going to work on shortening that intro, I guess.
Well, that's a lot of BS to deal with. Damn.
It's a lot, and it seems like it's still going. I had to switch computers after I completed the pitch for today. As I was getting ready to get, to get online, the camera stopped working and the mic stopped working. So, sometimes this is a violation of our Fourth Amendment right to secure communications, and privacy is a Third Amendment right. The whole Constitution under the Patriot Act has been rendered null and void. And that's why I'm excited to share with you and to chat with you and the audience about how we can restore liberty in America by ending the Fed and going green instead.
Fantastic. I can't wait to hear how.
So how's your day going? You hanging in there so far or what?
I'm hanging in there. It's been a long day and a half. You know how convention goes. It's balls to the wall, whether it's virtual or in person. So it's no different today than any other time.
Props to you for, for the patience and for, showing enthusiasm anyway. I mean, whether you're hosting or talking or listening or asking, it's a lot of work. So, and I can see that you put in a lot of work on your face, and but you look fantastic. And I'm hoping that we can keep you entertained here as we go through this. Also, want to thank Dan, the Taxation is Theft Berman, for putting this on. To put together a conference, 40 speakers of live streaming, concurrent live streaming in 2 days is amazing. And, I think it's fantastic that there are that many people who are so excited about liberty that they want to speak about it for an hour. So that's a good thing for America. And hopefully we can translate that into a victory this year in November. And I think the conditions are ripe for it. So what I'd like to, do now, if you're good with it, Dre, is to pull up my slides and kind of just walk you through it. And, if you have any questions as we go through this, just jump right in and answer, and ask away. So my objective is to help you understand, hopefully make what appears to be a complicated issue and boil it down to simple, actionable steps that we can restore liberty and, get back to our constitutional values, get back to doing what we're supposed to be doing.
Absolutely. All right. We need to share screen here.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and my application window, and I'm going to jump over to this, and I'm going to present. All right, can you see my screen?
Yep.
And you can see the pitch deck. Okay, cool. All right, so again, this is a presentation to end the Fed and go green instead in order to restore liberty in America. So imagine for a moment that you lived in any part of the United States or around the world, and you had the best, fresh air. It smelled great. It's kind of like when you're out in the middle of the park or the middle of nowhere. If you notice how the air just smells better when you're out there. So imagine that feeling of that fresh air and knowing that you can breathe in, you can take a big glass of water and know that it doesn't have lead or PFAS. You know that it's perfectly healthy. The food tastes great. You can eat the food without being worried about toxins or pesticides or whatever. You can actually afford a good living, and you do so, and you know that when you work an hour today, your money's going to be worth the same thing into the future, even 50 years into the future when you're ready to retire. That to me is what liberty is, right? That to me is what our country is based on. And I want to be clear. I believe that America has the best set of founding documents in the world. We have a Declaration of Independence, which grants our natural rights to life, liberty, and love in a way that I don't know that any other set of documents or declaration anywhere else in the world does. Our Constitution protects those rights to life, liberty, and love. And by the way, I know it's pursuit of happiness, but what is pursuit of happiness if it's not the freedom to love however you wish to express your love? So I summarize that as life, liberty, and love. Our Constitution puts in place a separation of powers and checks and balances, and we have a Bill of Rights, which are the first 10 amendments to that Constitution, which grant the absolute rights of the people. Now, most people don't know this, but without the Bill of Rights, we wouldn't have a country. We wouldn't have the United States of America. After our founding fathers, they fought the British. We won our independence. We drafted a Constitution, and the Constitution itself, there was not a quorum. There were not enough states who were willing to sign the Constitution without also protecting the rights of the people. And so the Bill of Rights is absolutely critical. And right now, I think you'll agree after you see the end of this, after you see this presentation, that under the Patriot Act and under secret FISA courts and other things that have happened in the last, let's call it 20 years, especially since 9/11, but really it's, I think, 40 years and counting, the Bill of Rights has been undermined, if not overthrown, and as a result, it's rendered our Constitution null and void. And that's really what this is all about. Now, I believe that I'm not alone in this thinking, because otherwise, we have 70% of America who's sick and tired of the two-party system. Pretty much everybody recognizes, except for the hardcore R's and D's on both sides, that the two-party system does not represent the everyday American. And I think that's where this stat comes from. I believe it's a Gallup poll that showed that 70% was ready for a third option, or rather just an American liberty-based constitutional option. So what does this look like? And why do I feel like we actually can win? The libertarian candidate this year can actually win the presidency. And the reason why is because we have a president who has abused power. I think it's pretty indisputable that that's the case. But the Democratic alternative and Vice President Biden, he's the one that first presented the Patriot Act. And the Patriot Act is what created and enabled and empowered a president like Trump. And so we basically have a choice between the Patriot Act and the Patriot Act. And, that doesn't sound like much of a choice to me. And so as a libertarian, what we're able to do this year is to say to the American people, listen, in the last 20 years, things have not been going the right way. And if you're black or brown, then you can say, listen, I don't know about you, but I haven't had my constitutional rights respected since the dawn of the country. And they would be right to say that. Again, we have the best set of founding documents, the best Constitution, the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights, and that is what makes America great: liberty. And if we are going to really make America great again, we need to restore liberty in America. And in doing so, the majority of Americans will be on board, and we will end up with a winning coalition of constitutional conservatives, liberty-minded Republicans and Democrats, military veterans, intelligence officials who've pledged an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I believe that we'll have environmentally progressive Gen Z and millennials on board. We'll have women and minority groups who've been treated unfairly for as long as they can remember. These are people that share a common bond of deprivation of liberty and a desire to restore liberty, not just for ourselves, but for everybody, because we all benefit when we do that. So before I get into exactly how the plan to do this, I just want to share with you a little bit about my personal liberty story. It started when I was a kid. I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit, and we watched the crack epidemic of the 80s and 90s unfold on the evening news on a nightly basis. And it was the same people. It was the black families of Detroit that were destroyed, not only in Detroit, but in urban areas around the country. And, I asked my parents, well, why is this? Why is this happening? And the answer I got was, well, we don't know, Joe. It's just the way it is. And so to me, that meant that if this was happening, that's because somebody wanted this to happen. Somebody was actually making money off of this. And I didn't know it at the time, but, I do believe that our intelligence community is involved in drug trafficking. I think there are too many issues, right? There are too many leaks that suggest that may be the case. There are too many coincidences in terms of conflicts of interest relative to the way the law is set up and who benefits. So as a result, I decided I was going to fight the fight. I ended up going to Michigan State, got a degree in international relations and political economy. I learned about the intersection of politics and economics and money. And it was my first job right after I graduated from Michigan State that I was working as a financial advisor at an investment bank, and the Twin Towers were hit. The two planes flew into the Twin Towers. And, that was devastating. To me, I know most of America everybody was traumatized by that. I was traumatized for a different reason, because in the year prior to that, during the Bush-Gore debates, President Bush lied about nation building. He projected onto Vice President Gore that President Bush didn't believe in nation building. But this was totally unprompted. And if you go back and look at the YouTube video, you could tell that he was lying, which meant that we were going to war. And that's what I shouted up to my buddies when they were upstairs playing World of Warcraft. And by the way, I write about all this stuff in my book, Hijacking America, Liberty Strikes Back, which you can see, you can check out for yourself at hijackingamerican.com. So when those towers came down, I was upset because to me, only the United States could succeed in an attack on the United States of this degree. And it took me 8 years from that point to commit to joining the Marine Corps, because it just seems like such a tall task. But ultimately, if I was going to be true to my word, true to what I felt was kind of a reason for being, to fight the good fight, then I needed to become a Marine in order to learn how to lead and be led. And so in 2008, I ended up becoming a Marine at 30 years old, a Marine Corps officer. I was a logistics officer. I went to Asia and to Africa, and it was in the second deployment as a logistics officer that I made a decision that became, let's call it, formative for the rest of my life. I ended up authorizing alcohol in violation of unit order and discovering that one of my Marines was a suicidal alcoholic. I got lucky. We didn't lose the Marine, and I was able to call up my commanding officer, say, listen, sir, I made a mistake. This is the situation. And the commanding officer took myself and my gunnery sergeant off the ship. It wasn't so cut and dry. I mean, really what happened was my gunny authorized alcohol. I wrote him up, but I didn't turn him in. And as a result, I ended up going along with it after a bit of time. And it was a comfort-based decision. And we learned in the Marine Corps never to make comfort-based decisions. And I learned the hard way. So that was the lesson that I learned, is that never to make comfort-based decisions. The rules are in place for a reason. And that we need to make sure our rules and our laws are aligned for the American people so that we can make sure that we have liberty through and through. So after I got out of the Marine Corps, and actually what happened was that I felt so badly about what I did that I ended up taking my phone into a top secret room and I turned it on. But before I did that, I deleted everything on my profile. So now the Marine Corps is thinking, okay, what is this officer doing here? He deleted everything off his profile. He took a phone. The guy, they didn't know, right? But I was feeling horrible. I wanted to get out of uniform, and I knew that was a way to do it, but I didn't want to go to prison. So I got rid of everything. I didn't view anything. Anyway, what ended up happening, and I thought that I would end up getting an investigation or something for a short period of time, but I never received a warrant. And instead, what ended up happening is that the government had numerous people trying to live with me or monitor me. I had black FBI surveillance vans outside my house. I had one woman come in saying that she was an Air Force, had an active Air Force clearance, and then she tried to ingratiate herself with me by saying that she believed that 9/11 was an inside job. The executive director for Air Force investigations looked at my LinkedIn profile right when the start of all this was happening without turning off, so I could see who was looking at my LinkedIn profile, because it shows you if you have a certain level of privacy. And so I knew that this was going on, and I just hoped my plan was to provide as much transparency as possible so that they can complete their investigation and be over and done with. Unfortunately, that never really quite happened. And instead, the Patriot Act enabled them to do exactly what the IRS entrapment tool just reauthorized, to monitor, surveil, obstruct, and interfere, everything you can think of, basically prevent you from making any progress in your life and steal your future. That's what they did since 2012. And I ended up getting into business school by not telling a soul about it. I didn't use any military references. I changed my most recent resume structure by volunteering to do some Hurricane Sandy relief so that I could tell a positive story on my application, as opposed to the negative story related to the Marine Corps. And I could also use different references. So that's how I was able to get out of that entrapment. In business school, I worked on launching a company called Earth Loans, and the objective was to undermine oil revenue, because in my studies, I learned that, independent studies on my own, I learned that it was oil revenue, in my opinion, that is controlling, the oil bank cartel is controlling America, and keeping us in these wars overseas and preventing us from transitioning to something that's clean, green, and healthy and wealthy, so that America can be free again. So I ran for office in 2002 after the Twin Towers came down for the first time. And then on an environmental and constitutional platform, I ran again in 2014, again within the Democratic Party, this time rather than a conservative Dem, as a liberty Dem, to test the message of liberty within the Democratic Party, and found out that they were receptive. I mean, gay rights, women's rights, legalizing cannabis, those are all liberty issues. So that's my background. That's how I got started with my liberty mission. And I just want to point out, that, again, let's imagine that we have clean air, right? We feel great. Well, unfortunately, 43% of America, 441 million Americans, has air that causes asthma or premature death or lung cancer. This is a American Heart and Lung Association study. 141 million Americans, 43% have unsafe air to breathe. I mean, that's the most basic liberty issue I can think of. Liberty is fresh water, right? Liberty is knowing that you're going to drink water and you're going to be okay. Unfortunately, most people in the United States, we're looking at about 20 to 25 million people with lead exposure. And then most people is the phrase that was used by the Rhode Island Department of Health with regard to PFAS. Most people in the country have a chemical that is used on your nonstick pans. It's now in our water, and now the chemical causes cancer. It causes immunodeficiency problems, premature birth, developmental reproductive issues, learning disabilities, mood disorders, cholesterol, blood pressure, hearing and memory loss, joint muscle pain. I mean, this is just from the air and the water so far, right? Then you put in the food, and you've got another 141 million Americans that are either obese or are coming out with diabetes. Now, this is one of those things. I mean, Dre, are you with me? This is one of those things where if you don't have clean air, fresh water, and healthy food, I mean, what else is there,
That's right. That is definitely, it should be the top of the issues as far as everyone is concerned. We do have an audience question from one Twitch member.
Yeah, sure. Let's see it. And please keep me posted on the time too. I can't see the timer from my computer.
We're about 21 minutes in right now.
Okay, great.
Tasmus 11 says, would you fashion yourself as a sovereign citizen?
Yeah, well, I believe in sovereignty. Unfortunately, I have a social security number, right? And I don't think there's an easy way to get rid of it. So I'm familiar with the straw straw man concept of being a sovereign citizen. I don't know how to fix the problem. I'm already part of the system. I believe that we ought to all be sovereign people. So it's kind of where I'm at. I do have friends that have not gotten Social Security numbers for their kids, and I think it's great. I believe that that we have a responsibility as a people and even as a government, if we choose that, to ensure that we're able to provide for one another and to care for the people that are most vulnerable. But Social Security in particular, I think, is what was one of the first things to kind of subjugate the people. And it's a Ponzi scheme. It doesn't even work. I mean, if we want something like that, it should be a legitimate pension system or a savings plan. And we'll get into that. So I hope that answers the question.
That's all I got for you so far.
What's that?
Oh, go right ahead.
Okay, so I also believe that liberty is affordable housing. I mean, liberty, these are basic rights, right? I mean, air, water, food, shelter. These are Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And so we don't have affordable housing anymore. About 10 million, last check, about 7 million people prior to the coronavirus were actually living in their cars, and they're not counted as homeless. So, and if you look at the chart on the right, you can see that we've had not one, but now two housing bubbles. And this is tied to the Federal Reserve in terms of their asset reinflation. And that leads to job loss, incarceration, drug use, mental and physical health disorders, and much, much higher taxes. I guess that's the point I really want to make here. The Federal Reserve is entrapping America with taking away our liberty, and we're driving up taxes as a result. You can have a fair wage, but without having living wage laws. If we each owned a share in the Fed, we'd be better off, and I'll get into that. But right now, the wages versus the cost of living, right? If you're a male full-time worker, in 1985, it took only, I think it was under 30 weeks to pay for all of your everyday expenses, right? So whereas now it's 53 weeks, and there's only 52 weeks in a year. So the average worker today, the average male worker, doesn't have enough time in the year at the current wage to actually raise a family. And I believe that is one of the biggest issues that this country is facing, because families break down as a result of stress from money and sex typically. And if you don't have enough money to care for a family, you're gonna end up with lots of stress. You probably end up in divorce. You may be looking at bankruptcy at some point. You may be more inclined to turn to crime, drug use, etc. And I think even mass shootings is a symptom of the fact that the money is concentrated entirely at the top as a result of our current Federal Reserve system.
Joe, are you trying to share your screen right now?
Yes.
It's not displaying.
Okay. Let's see here.
There we go.
Oh. Okay.
Okay.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
All right. Thank you for that, Ray. Now, this is something that most libertarians are going to know. The dollar is down 99% since 1971. Now, if you look at online and you say, oh, well, is there a study that shows that? You're going to find 1,000,001 studies that say this is not the case. But the simplest study is to say, what was the value of gold in 1971? And what is the value of gold today? And in 1971, the value of gold was right around $35-40 an ounce. And today, it's closer to $1,750, I think, was the last check on Friday, right around $1,750. So if you take $1,750 minus the $40, and then you divide one into the other, you come up with a total loss, which means that all of us have to work harder and longer just to stand in place. And so that is a deprivation of liberty. So I believe that, as Lincoln said, the liberty is protection against a vicious inflationary bank-owned currency. And then he said that in his monetary policy speech. Now, liberty also is definitely not a stay-at-home order. As a result of the coronavirus, which I believe has been used as a tool of oppression, we've got 23 million that are on the unemployment rolls. And then President Trump likes to claim that 30 million, at least at last count, jobs were saved as a result of the Paycheck Protection Program. But the irony here is that if it was 30 million and we had 2 rounds of the PPP, let's use his numbers. Let's call it 60 million people whose jobs have been saved. They've only been saved because the government bailed them out. So in other words, we now have over 80 million Americans, which is over half of the workforce, because it's 150 million Americans in the workforce, close to half of the workforce that are now on government support. And this is indicative of a system that I think that you would agree, if you have to bail out the entire economy because we've got a virus or we've got a pandemic or a natural disaster or war, then you've got a system that just isn't working. Not only that, but the governmental response has been to limit our First Amendment rights of assembly and speech as a result. We have a Third Amendment right to personal privacy, but if you go to the IRS Get My Payment tool, you will see that it says, quote, use of this system constitutes consent to monitoring, interception, recording, reading, copying, or capturing of all activities, and that we have no right to privacy in the system. But it doesn't explain what the system is. It doesn't say only the IRS Get My Payment tool. And some people will defend, okay, well, you're getting money. I can't think of a single good reason why the United States government needs to take away our rights just to give us money. That's just not how it's supposed to work. That's not liberty. And so this is effectively what they did with this system is they reauthorized the Patriot Act. And in doing so, they eliminated our Third Amendment right to privacy and our Fourth Amendment right to be secure in our communications and our property. So I hope you see we're painting a picture here, right? Liberty is also public transparency. I mean, we have no transparency right now. Everything is hidden behind classification. We don't even know if the president has a conflict of interest financially or not because he didn't even disclose his tax returns. Now, there used to be a rule, a constitutional rule dating back to 1926 called a void for vagueness doctrine. And that rule that required that all laws are clear, objective, and easily understood. Now, if that were the case today, we wouldn't have anywhere near as many laws as we have. They would be far easier to understand, and we wouldn't have millions of people behind bars indefinitely. What I'm proposing is that we actually have an Amendments for America package. The first and foremost and most important, I think, is the Void for Vagueness Amendment, in which we make this a constitutional amendment to require that every single law adheres to that former rule that was nullified under the Patriot Act, that all laws are clear, objective, and easily understood. And I would take it a step further that we open source government so that we can make sure that all government operations are objective and verifiably so as a result of that transparency. And I would say that everything in government, everything, with the sole exception of military matters, only under an open declaration of war should be open source. And in doing so, we would be more secure as a nation, both in our liberty and in our security, because when the difference between open source and closed source, when you expose your flaws to the world tells you what your flaws are, and it's easier for us to fix them at that point. Whereas if we don't do that, we have to rely on a few people, hopefully smart people in a room, and hope that they are doing the right thing. And you end up creating a police state, which I believe is what we have right now. And as a result, we end up losing our rights. So it's kind of an either or proposition. We either open up our government and strengthen our government and our liberty as a result, or we keep what I believe is a growing security state that is taking away our rights, and really already has. So what I'm proposing is that we get back to basics. We have a liberty, justice, and a constitution for all, and we apply it evenly to all people. Because I believe that liberty is government that is trustworthy. We should be able to trust our government, but we cannot do so unless we know, as Reagan said, trust but verify. Unless we can verify, objectively verify that government is trustworthy, we can't trust government. Now, that's kind of the basics, right? Now, a lot's happened in the last 20 years since 9/11. But it started even before that. Right? We had secret FISA courts established in 1978. There were the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act created the secret court system. And in doing so, they rendered void the Fifth Amendment right to due process, the Sixth and Seventh Amendment rights to trial by jury, and an Eighth Amendment right to a prohibition against excessive bail and cruel and unusual punishment. And those secret courts created and helped to create a stacked public court system. And that stacked public court system helped to overturn our election system. And now corporations own our elections. And as a result, they continue to undermine our First Amendment rights. And those same corporations are now censoring our speech, which we're seeing with the coronavirus. We're seeing with Facebook and Twitter, and they're taking down our posts. And that is because, now I know there's a lot of people don't like this. So listen, I don't believe that either party is the right choice. I don't like President Trump, and I don't like Vice President Biden as a candidate either. Anybody who supports the Patriot Act and the Federal Reserve is no bueno in my book. Now, President Trump, he appointed an FCC chair in 2017 that repealed net neutrality, and then he appointed 2 justices to the Supreme Court, both with less than the 2/3 Senate majority, which was a constitutional or a precedent dating back to the Civil War, which was first abandoned in 91. But he appointed the 3rd and 4th justices under that so-called nuclear option. And as a result, when net neutrality was challenged in the court system and it got all the way up to the Supreme Court simply ruled not to rule on the decision. So they upheld the lower court's ruling. And as a result, now our freedom of speech and assembly is effectively gone. When you throw in a bunch of other things, like the internet is controlled by 3 corporations and all internet traffic flows through the tier 1 backbone of AT&T, Verizon, and Sprint, then you recognize that perhaps it's very, very possible that everything we see and hear could fall into the category of fake news, which is the reason why President Trump talks about it so much. So, everything started again. It was September 11th, and the objective was for a new Pearl Harbor. They wanted to upgrade our military force and posture. And 45 days later, extreme thought is now considered a crime. They passed the Patriot Act, which made extreme thought a crime. So no longer did it require violent actions. And now it was just a thought, like Thought Police, like 1984, like Minority Report, if you watch that movie. Mass surveillance, we know that from Snowden, loss of due process. And so now as a result, basically your 1st, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th amendment rights are gone. 8th Amendment right is gone. And we know the 9th and the 10th Amendment rights protect the rights of the people and reserve rights to the people and to the state and local government. The Patriot Act undermines all of that. And if you think they're not coming for your guns, because that's a Second Amendment right, they are coming for your guns because, and I don't have a slide for this, but a Michigan judge appointed by a Republican recently ruled that our rights are not absolute. And again, going back to the start of our country, we would not have a United States of America without the Bill of Rights, which means that the Bill of Rights was intended to be an absolute, a list of some absolute rights, but not an exhaustive list as we see in the 9th and 10th Amendments. So today, instead of protecting our liberty with clean air, fresh water, healthy food, money that maintains value over time with affordable housing and a citizen dividend, today instead we build walls instead of bridges. We separate parents from children at the borders, and we set the precedent to to do the same for the American people. So the question here, and this might be a good time to take a break if there are any questions from the audience, and if not, I'll go ahead and continue. But do we have anything?
We actually do have a question, and I know my answer to this question, but what is yours? What is the lowest acceptable minimum wage?
0, actually. And I think that we can accomplish that because if we own our own money and every citizen is getting a dividend from the gross national product, you can actually eliminate the minimum wage and still accomplish something akin to, let's say, $15 an hour. So I think that the key here and what we can accomplish by ending the Fed and going green instead is the elimination and repeal of, 50, 75%, like majority of the legislation on the books, because most of that is the result of problems that were created by the fact that we don't own our money. But when we own our own money, we actually will end up having a vote in how things work. We'll end up getting a piece of the gross national product, and we'll all be wealthy and a heck of a lot healthier as a result. And so we won't need a lot of these rules and laws that are on the books that were put in place as kind of a Band-Aid on top of a cut without addressing the actual cause. And the cause was the Federal Reserve in the first place.
Sorry, Finn, I was muted. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to me that people think that we just need to keep raising and raising and raising it, and people have a right to live at this wage, and it's just absolute. That's the bottom line. And we forget how and why that all became a thing. And I actually myself kind of do on occasion. I'm drawing a blank right now, honestly. But I know that it was, good intentions, I'm sure. But, who does it hurt most? The low-skilled, low-wage earner.
Yeah, yes, and it also hurts business owners because every time you raise the minimum wage, you end up eliminating jobs. The real issue here is not so much the wage. The real issue is the fact that money tends to lose value over time, and therefore we have no objective measurement of value and no objective means of transferring value and storing value. And so if we were to replace our inflationary system, or as Lincoln said, our vicious currency, if we replace our vicious currency with a system that retains value over time, and I prefer to have it backed by nature because gold is good in a certain way, but it doesn't account for all the what do you call it? I'm drawing a blank at this point, but there's a negative externalities. The gold does not take into consideration the negative externalities related to depriving or debasing our capital base. And when I say capital base, I'm talking about our stock of clean air, our stock of fresh water, our stock of good soil that helps produce healthy food. This is natural capital that needs to be accounted for in our system, and our current system doesn't do it. And that's the reason. That's the biggest problem. That and the fact that they're inflating away the value creates a constant need to increase wages over time in order to keep up on the treadmill. But it doesn't address the underlying cause of the fact that the Fed is intentionally devaluing our money in order to keep us subjected to slavery over time. And that's the real issue here. What do you think about that, Dre? I mean, I'm presenting, but what do you think?
Excuse me. I would absolutely agree. We have another comment from Zygmunt Reinbach. I hope I'm saying that right. He says, when you increase minimum wage while also increasing welfare benefits, you disincentivize people from finding meaningful employment.
And I believe that is a false, that is another one of the false concepts that's been promoted by our economists employed at universities across the country who are on the payroll. I don't believe it. The issue here is, let's look at today, for example. You've got all those people, you have 20 some odd, 80 million people that are effectively on government support as a result of Trump's brilliant handling of the coronavirus, and as a result of what I would probably argue is a democratic attack in some ways as well, because I think that this is probably another topic for another day, but whether or not there really is a pandemic is something I think worthy of exploring. But whenever you have welfare recipient or welfare or money that's given out, let's call it unemployment, let's call it, in this case, the unemployment is $600 a week. But if you go back to work, you stop getting it. That's the problem. That's what disincentivizes people from going to work. And I think that the issue here is whether or not we believe in compulsory work, or, which another word for that is called slavery, or do we believe in freedom? And personally, I believe in liberty and freedom, liberty, equality, opportunity, and freedom, not compulsion. I don't believe in slavery. And I think that's the system that we have. And that's what everybody keeps talking about when they say, oh, well, welfare means you don't have to go to work. No, what they're saying is the system, the way it's set up, is a disincentive to work. But if you own a share of the national product through the ownership in the Fed and a citizen dividend, you don't have to not work to get that. You should be able to do both. Instead, a properly structured program would encourage people to go to work and encourage people to become wealthier, because it's not money that you have to give up. So that's, I believe that there's a lot of people have been overeducated and miseducated, I believe, is what's really happening. And I can say that with certainty. My economics professor at one of the schools that I attended, he laughed off the idea that the Federal Reserve is a private bank. And even though it said so on their own website, right? So, these people they're everywhere. They're absolutely everywhere, and they're lying to us. And so that's why I think that President Trump is as popular as he is and within his own party, because half of what he says is true. The problem is the other half of what he says isn't. And it's difficult to discern what's true and what's not. The reality is we do have a system of fake news. 100%, he's right about that. And it's not just fake news, but there's a lot of education that's misinformed too. I want to just kind of drive home this point. And Dre, what's the time check on this?
Ahead and let's hear your last point, and then I want you to go ahead and tell people how they can find you and keep up with what you're up to.
Oh wow! So we're out of time, huh?
We're running up on the clock. We are a little bit.
How much time do I have here?
You have a couple minutes.
All right. So let me just drive home the point here. The golden rule: whoever is making the money makes the rules. If we don't like the rules, we need to change those rules. So the objective is to end the Fed and go green instead. And the way we do that is to change the ownership structure of the Federal Reserve to a credit union, so that every citizen has an equal ownership stake in our economy, so that we can get off of oil and out of oil wars, and so we can invest into renewables and organics instead. We can open source our credit system to make sure that it's objective and verifiable, and so that we know for a fact that the closed source, TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian aren't still redlining. That's entirely possible. They can be doing that. When we do this, what we will do is we will freeze and seize the Fed assets. So at least 50% of our total debt is owned by the Federal Reserve. Another 25% is intra-government debt, and about 25% is foreign debt. When we freeze and seize the Fed, we will be able to cancel the intra-government debt and take the $12 trillion in assets that the Fed has and redeploy that in the form of a universal savings account to the people, and that money can be invested for healthcare, for retirement, and for the environment all at the same time. And we will also end debt as money, and so our total debt at that point will be closer to $6 trillion as opposed to $25 trillion and counting, courtesy of the coronavirus. So the summary so instead we replace the Fed with a credit union of the United States. It's a citizen ownership, gives every citizen a dividend. It's money that's backed by nature. It's stable value, and we can account for the negative externalities of depleting our natural capital. By open sourcing our monetary system, we can reduce corruption and improve transparency. And then, if anyone has any questions about how we do it, it's very similar to the way crypto is done. You do an ICO, and people don't know this, but that's exactly how the Federal Reserve launched back in 1913. They more or less conducted an off-chain ICO. It's a fundraising mechanism where you create a company and you allow people to subscribe and put the money in, and that's exactly what we would do here. And we would allow up to, we would back it by nature, and we would use natural assets like land and water, and we would geotag it. And I've got a whole paper done on this, and I created it when I was doing Earth Loans. But again, I would talk about the Void for Vagueness Amendment and the Planet-Friendly Money Amendment. I think these are absolutely imperative if we are going to restore liberty in America. And I have this information on my website at libertystrikesback.com. So when we end the Fed and go green instead, we will restore liberty in America for the first time since 1913. We will be able to know with confidence that we will have clean air, fresh water, healthy food, affordable housing, a fair wage, a smaller government, and an ownership stake in our economy, which is absolutely critical. Until we do that, we'll end up in endless oil wars, and we'll end up being poisoned, which is exactly what we talked about at the beginning. 141 million Americans living in conditions of bad air, diabetes, and overweight. We can end all that. Whoever has the money makes the rules. It's time to end the Fed and go green instead. So thank you for your time, Dre. I appreciate you listening. Appreciate the questions from the audience. Go to libertystrikesback.com to get involved. And you know what? If you are a delegate for the Libertarian Party, I would appreciate your support this weekend. I would love to be the nominee of the party. And in doing so, I believe that we can call out the corrupt two-party system and let America know that this is our one-time opportunity to get rid of the Patriot Act, which Trump could have done if he wanted to when he had the largest Republican majority in GOP history since 1929, and he didn't do it. We get rid of the Patriot Act. Let's end the Fed. Let's go green instead and create a healthy, wealthy, and free America. Thanks a lot. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for being with us, Joe. And that was a great talk. I look forward to speaking with you more in the future. Good luck to you.
Good, thank you.
All right. All right, guys. Next up, come back in just a few minutes. We will have Chrissy Wickers. She's coming to us to talk to us about free market activism. See you later.